And looking back over the arguments presented by conservatives and liberals concerning social issues throughout history, something struck me as rather profound. Conservatives win almost all of the battles, but liberals always win the war. Not just sometimes, always. Look at all the major issues, and you see the same pattern. A single liberal thinker, or a small group of thinkers, comes up with an idea that challenges the social norms for the time. Conservatives react dismissively and derisively, but the idea gradually takes hold among liberals and eventually spreads among moderates. Conservatives become alarmed and step up their rhetoric, resorting to anger, legal action, often even violence, in an attempt to stop what they perceive as an attack on their way of life. And they usually get their way at first, winning most of the battles. But then more moderate conservatives begin to accept the idea as right. The conservative laws get repealed, and the idea that was once considered extremely liberal is then adopted by society, and it becomes mainstream. Eventually, the die-hard conservatives opposed to the idea essentially disappear. Then another liberal idea is born, and the cycle begins again. Ironically, over time, even the most liberal ideas can eventually come to be considered part of the conservative ideal. Let me give you some examples. Freedom of religion and speech were once considered radical and liberal in the extreme. Conservatives fought against these rights initially, but eventually adopted them, and now they're considered revered fundamental rights, even to conservatives. Let me give you an even better example: slavery. Slavery was part of the status quo in this country for many, many decades. It was generally considered a good and natural part of society, and the conservatives at the time even used biblical scripture to support it. They reacted according to the pattern, which eventually resulted in the Civil War. But today, even die-hard conservatives agree that slavery is repugnant. Look at women's rights and minority rights, and you see those issues also went through the same cycle as well. Today's most contentious issues include embryonic stem cell research and gay marriage, and if the same pattern persists, then within a decade or so we should see both ideas adopted and accepted by all but the most conservative extremists. And eventually, even they'll adopt what is currently considered the liberal position. Anyway, that's been my observation with social issues I've looked into, but I do concede I may be wrong. Perhaps I've missed some significant social issues where a liberal idea that initially gained some widespread acceptance actually turned out to be wrong eventually, and if so, I'd really like to know. And that's where my challenge comes in here. I would like to hear from anyone, liberal or conservative, doesn't matter, who can think of any historical instances where the liberal position on a social issue turned out to be wrong and the conservative one turned out to be right. If it turns out that at least a handful of such instances exist, then the current struggle between liberal and conservative ideas may make some sense as a way of striking a balance. But if not, perhaps it would make more sense for conservatives to think twice before opposing the liberal position when it comes to social issues. Because the liberals are going to turn out to be right in the long run anyway, right?